Hey everyone, and welcome back to Reading Crossbow. My name is Lana, and as always, I have my buddy here.
I'm Rob, and I'm happy to talk to you and all of you today about Dragonfall.
Yeah, so Dragonfall was my pick. If you're new here, I say this every episode. Hopefully, you guys aren't getting tired of it. If you're new here, we each pick a book. And so Rob picked The Priory of the Orange. I picked Dragonfall. And Rob just did his halfway summary. That is kind of designed as an episode to tell you, like, should you pick up this book or not, based off his halfway thoughts. And then we pick up the next episode in our book series by us doing the review together. Interesting. So this is my pick, and felt like a your pick in a way, kind of. And that was your pick. Felt like a my pick in a way, kind of.
Kind of missed the mark.
It was very all over the place this month.
We also, I noted in my halfway that somehow we both picked books with dragons as the intent, and we probably picked the least dragon-y books.
Yeah, absolutely. These are like, these covers are smothered in dragons, and I was just hoping for, a bit more dragon. But we digress. So in these episodes, if it was a book I chose and we're doing our dual review, then I lead sort of an interview session. So you can catch Rob's interview of me where he tries to pull my thoughts out of the review, and I'm going to try to pull Rob's thoughts out of the review. But first, we always do our 10,000 foot summary. So Dragonfall is a book about two separate worlds, two heroes in each, or two focal characters. And one is a world similar to our world here on Earth, I'm imagining. We'll get into setting as we discuss this further. And then one is the dragon world beyond the veil, as they call it. And here in this world is Arcady. And he lives in a world where dragons are revered as gods. But actually, long ago, they weren't friends with humans. But that's not remembered. A lot of history has gone by. And Everin is a dragon and lives in his world beyond the veil. And he's the only male dragon left of his kind. There's a lot of pressures on him. He has this kind of prophecy about him. And he is pulled down to Earth through a rift. He falls, so to speak, down to Earth. And this happens basically through some actions that Arcady makes to change his own destiny. And while trying to change his own destiny, the two are united in a path/heist to change Arcady's life and also hopefully change Everin's life. And craziness happens along the way. Close enough?
No, that sounds really good. I think you kind of nailed the introduction of the book, and where the plot goes from there is kind of a ride.
It is. It's a short book though, so it's a short ride. Not as many rides as this would be like an adventure park, and this would be like a carnival. We're talking about going on a ride, but you know what, that's okay. Dragon month, that's what this was all about. And next month is not Dragon month, so that'll be next week's episode. For those who are curious and want to join in on the book club, after we finish reviewing these books, we go into our next picks, so you can always look back through the books and find our picks of the month. But before we dive into this, we usually start with kind of talking about each of the sections of the book and diving into them. And then we go through Show Me the Map, because this book happens to have a map. We talk about whether or not there's crossbows, and then we rate the book. So we're going to start off with characters. And I just wanted to ask you, Rob, far less characters in this book from the last book. Did any characters stand out to you? Any characters that didn't? Or what did you generally feel about the characters in Dragonfall?
I thought they were all really good. I think there's, I think, 4 point of view characters that are used throughout the book, and I thought all of them were distinct. I noted during my halfway that especially the first 3 that show up in the book, they actually use different point of view, like tense. Like the Arcady speaks in a very strong first person, uses a lot of I, whereas Everin speaks very much in the second person, says a lot of you, because Everin's talking at Arcady, or it actually explains in the beginning book they're actually writing it down, like a book towards Arcadian, so it's always referencing you, which is a second person tense. Whereas, and then Soren is very much, Soren doesn't talk. Soren has like a vow of silence, and all of their chapters are written in the third person. And I found that just fascinating.
Yeah, super interesting. I actually did really like that. I had some struggle with the first chapters in the variety, but we'll talk about that in the prose section.
Okay.
But and so the fourth character would be Kasha,
Yeah.
which is Evren's sister.
Yeah, dragon, a second dragon. And but as far as the characters, I think the one that I most enjoyed was Evren's chapters. And I think that was mostly because that one felt more like a conversation, the way it's written, where it's the Evren's constantly talking to Arcady, and I felt those chapters. I mean, they felt far more personal than the other chapters, and I think that drew me into that part of the story a lot more. What about you?
Yeah, Evren was definitely my favorite character because it is a version of a dragon. I have not read that perspective yet. So he's a dragon that is basically has three forms. His dragon form, his he calls his preterite form, which is like a humanoid dragon. So it's human shape but like dragon features. And then there's his more human form, which is like this sort of like magic he uses to make his predator form look less scary to humans. So that was interesting for me to have like three versions of a character. And depending on which version of himself he was in, I felt like he acted more like feral's the wrong word, but like more animal, depending on it was. And you definitely get that more in the first chapter when he's definitely his dragon self. But yeah, Evren was great. And I thought when you're talking about like writing in different perspectives, Evren wrote from the first person for himself. He said I in those chapters,
Yeah,
but definitely said you.
Yeah,
right. For
I think they're
Arcady.
solidly like I think they're actually first person written, but because of the heavy use of the word you, that makes it feel like a second person. So it gives it kind of very different voices between those chapters.
Yeah, it was very unique. I did not find myself loving these characters. I will say that I wanted to like them more. We often exchange text messages. I've put those up before in the past. I don't think I sent any to you this time, but I think you sent a few to me. And I got this distinct impression on reading this time that you might have enjoyed it more than myself this time, but I know we'll get into that. But I struggled with Arcady, which is one of the main character viewpoints. And just because I don't know, I felt like a bit of the plot on this was a little weak in many moments. We always get to that, so hang in there with us. But I mean, Arcady has a lot of struggle. Arcady, there's a plague in their world too. There's actually plagues in both of these books, which is very interesting. And has to survive a family, like staying on the family name, and all of this. And it just felt more teenage angst to me, even though I think they're a little older than like teenage angsty years maybe, and so I felt maybe too much angst from that character. I thought they'd have more of a developed viewpoint of it all. And then there's the character Soren, which is she's a acolyte, or they're oh my gosh, we'll address that. We're getting to that.
We'll get to that.
Yeah, they're an acolyte, which is studying to be a priest, but she's also like a hand of sorts, or a swordsman for one of the priests. He's a bit more shady, and so she has this double life. Oh wow, gosh, we're gonna do this the whole show.
Yeah. So now for me, I think Arcady was probably the most developed character. The character starts off with the most, things working against them, and I feel like they actually have to grow the most over the course of the story. The other characters, they follow a trajectory and they do change. I think all of at least the three main characters, they do evolve as the story goes, but I think Arcady is set up with the most stuff in their way, and they actually have to they have to overcome. And honestly, they don't. They just have to figure it out with all of those hindrances in their path. I found that to be really interesting.
They're a teenage dirtbag baby. They are. Like, it's just, oh, my family has a sad name, and oh, be damned it, I'm going to change it all. I don't know. They were set up with a brilliant backstory, I think. Like, pretty cool backstory. And I just kind of just found myself waiting. So, in terms of the characters, just Arcady didn't do it for me. Everin, I thought, was very cool in all the different kind of forms, and the way they're... Actually, Everin goes by he. That's their pronoun. But yeah, Soren just wasn't, maybe it's because it's not even the lack of being able to speak in their sections of the story. It's just, this is going to be a trilogy, I believe. And definitely. Yeah,
I think Soren's definitely being set up for future.
Yep.
This story was more just an introduction to Soren. I think Soren's actually a really interesting character. She's an orphan, and basically was raised in like a church orphanate group home, and essentially gets groomed by a high priest to become their like personal religious assassin. And I think that's freaking cool. I mean,
it is cool.
It's dark. I mean, but
yeah, it's like someone wrote all of these character points down on paper. And if I were to read these bullet points on paper, I'd be like, cool, badass, write that book. And then each character point, like the sub bullet points that make up that point, are just kind of weak. But, you know, it's maybe in the second book, I don't know. Characters were just kind of okay for me, but Everin's fantastic.
Okay. All right. What do you have next?
Okay, so you viewers at home heard us stumble. So we wanted to talk about the queer level of the book, the queerness level. And I think that's kind of a fun way to put it, because on the back of the novel, it talks about, queermance. This is a queermance. And this is the way like authors and other reviewers put it. And LGBTQIA plus friendly. So I definitely want to point out that we are both supporters and allies of our LGBTQIA plus friends, but neither of us are ourselves.
And in fact, in my midway review, I did note that that Arcady specifically uses the gender any,
because they say any, and so it's very unclear, and the author doesn't necessarily give you any descriptive qualities that would make you have to feel one way or the other. So I think we can interpret it, and I think that's fine and fair, and it doesn't matter and shouldn't matter to the story, and that's kind of the point of the story.
And one of the reasons why that is the case is because Arcady is a shapeshifter. They are using magic, are able to change their form, and they change into several different people throughout the course of this book. And I think both male and female characters, as far as the appearance. So I think that's even why part of the culture itself, like they have a hand gesture you use when you introduce yourself to identify which pronouns you want. And the reason for that is so many people in this culture, they may be, appear differently than how they feel. And so, they despite, they may look one way and they say, I want to use female pronouns, or vice versa. Because of their shape-shifting powers.
And there's actually a situation that's not plot spoilery, where they're in a brothel, and one of the people who service in the brothel say, what is your wish? Like, what do you wish of me? Like, and they can tell that the person they're talking to is a foreigner and doesn't know what they mean. And they basically say, like, I can be either one. Like, what would you like? And I thought that it was actually kind of cool. It's all fascinating. If you love magic, if maybe this type of book might have intimidated you before, I feel like it does a very good job of explaining it. So we wanted to touch on that. I wanted to bring that in because it is a big part of the story. And so if you're not sure and haven't read that yet, I feel like this is somewhat safe waters to tread into. I don't think it was overly.
There wasn't. I didn't feel it was
Too much.
preachy or
Yeah.
The book very clearly explains how this world works, and I think largely because of the shape changing, that's why things are the way they are.
Yeah, and another cool thing that I thought was interesting, and this is gonna get us into the prose, which is next, the writing, is when when characters are discussing each other, if they are from like a high level of society, they have the word they or their capitalized. They, them, their. And if they are not of a high level of society, they're lower class, then it's not capitalized. So it's very interesting, even in the writing style of the book, how the author handled gender identity and then handled gender identity in a class type society. I've just never seen that before. I thought it was unique, which brings us into, what did you think about the writing style in this book?
I already mentioned, because the point of view changes, I felt that the writing style was very interesting. We've kind of discussed before about when they've had different point of view, like first person, third person, in the same book. I want there to be a reason. And in this book, I really did kind of feel like there was some good reason. And it is kind of explained, especially as you get towards the end of the book. But I felt the book was actually very easy to read. It wasn't like a challenging to read in a good or bad way. It flowed very well. So one of the things I think I really liked about the way this was written, though, is how the same kind of themes kept coming back into the story from different sources. So, like, if there was some sort of theme to Arcadie's story, Everin was going to have a similar kind of theme in his story, and maybe even the other two characters. Like, there was these repeating themes that just kept coming in and out throughout the story, and it made it feel like this story really was, like, well planned. Like, the story, like, had been really well outlined and plotted out. And I like that in a book.
I struggled. So when you mentioned onions earlier, different layers, and you mentioned like plot, different character points lining up for these, like, it's like a yin and yang, and actually Priory of the Orange was just like that. So in Everin and Arcadie, having the layers that kind of matched and similarities in their stories, I felt like that was way deeper on way more levels with Tane. So I felt like the layers were much deeper in that one because it went back 1,000 years in that story, and these stories had kept their lineage for 1,000 years, and the two people that held the stones 1,000 years ago held them 1,000 years later. And I thought that plot development and that writing was a bit more consistent, whereas in this one I felt like it was a bit more loose. But outside of that, it was easy to read, very easy to read. I didn't feel the need for like a glossary or anything. Sometimes I like to look at, like, do I feel a need for one? Is this author bringing like new words, or, I mean, there's spells definitely that you don't understand. But then the author puts them in English. And so like, I felt like, nothing was unique in the terms of the story, but I felt like the characters were. So especially with our dragon character in the very first chapter, his thoughts, and he does go by him, him. He has not spoke like their language, the language of the world he's going to. He's read it in text, but he's not like spoken it out loud really. So like his thoughts come out, like, I think he says food at one point, like bread, or like things like that. Like, he's just talking like, less than kindergarten words, and that was like super cool. And then as he starts like picking up, he actually gets a job at one point. It's like, I need to learn the language better. Like, gets a job and is working on the docks. I wasn't expected. That's cool development. And it's partially so that he can learn the language, like, and actually talk better. And so I thought that was really neat. And then that came across in the writing in his chapters. So I really enjoyed that. So some parts of the writing were great for me, but I felt like there were some not glaring potholes, but very much unexplained elements of this story that I would hope come out in a second and third book, but to me were too big to not explain in the first story. In particular, like, there's these like wraith type creatures that are kind of defending the veil. Never really explained. There's a sort of an army at some point that comes out of nowhere, not trying to, like, give away too many spoilers. Never really explained. And there's a couple things that were just like, are you going to explain that? Or we just have to, like, be like, yeah, okay, that happened.
Yeah. No, I understand what you're saying, and I mean, I disagree. But the reason why I disagree is because I found that the elements, a lot of the stuff that was explained, like the magic system, I think that's actually was very unique. The entire concept of the magic system in this book felt very distinct.
Oh yeah, and we'll get to magic.
Okay,
so I agree with magic, but just not in the writing of it.
But then for the most part, yes, I think there was some stuff that wasn't well explained, but I think that's also because the characters genuinely don't know. Like, none of the characters actually seem to have a real good grasp on what's going on, like with the wraiths and that kind of stuff. They call it chaos, but chaos is kind of a big, broad term as far as, like, what does that mean? It means bad. That's what it means.
Yeah, and in the beginning, dragons are banished from the earth. Really, they're great, big, mythical, magical creatures, just banished from the earth.
Yeah. Magic.
Yeah. Magic? No. You hate stuff like that. You hate hand-wavy stuff. You annihilated this book over that, and you're just fine with poof in this one?
Yeah.
I'm shocked again. You cannot keep surprising me this month. My poor heart can't take it. How are you okay with that? Poof, dragon's gone. They never explain how. They never say some incantation in a book that's heavily spell-based. No.
No, I mean, I think they do explain it in the very beginning, but I think the story is incorrect. I suspect that it's been passed over time incorrectly. So but the story you get at the beginning of the book is that humans and dragons used to bond together. That has strengthened both of their magical abilities, but you can actually take magic from the other one, and at some point in the past, according to the dragons, the humans were like, we really don't need these dragons. We'll just take all the power, and now that we have tons of extra magic, we'll banish them to another world, another alternate plane of existence. And I think it's a cool origin story, and I think no one in this setting even knows what happened.
Huh. Okay. All right. I think we'll leave that one alone. And we'll move on over to setting. We just have a few more to get into, and then we are going to get into the map and crossbows and rating the book. But I just want to talk about setting real quick, because you tend to really enjoy talking about setting, more so than I do. What did you feel about it?
I think the setting was very broad brush. Like, there's some, obviously there's some different planes of existence, and there's this veil that's in between them that is pertinent to the plot. There's also, in this world, there's two nations. They used to be one, but it was split apart. And this is kind of one of those synchronicity where, there used to be dragons and humans, and then they were split apart. And then there used to be one empire, and that was split apart. These cultures, within the culture, it keeps getting split apart based on whether or not you contracted a disease at some point in the past, or whether or not you were rich enough to avoid the disease. So I found all of that to be very interesting. However, it did not go very deep into that lore. I thought was actually really funny was Soren has this like pet wyvern, like the size of a house cat. I'm picturing, like that just follows her around, and even will like help. That's but the people who worship dragons, don't seem to think that that's a dragon. I don't know if I saw something that seems pretty dragon-like to me.
Yeah,
Though tiny.
I mean, there's this section I totally pictured like a house cat too, like how you just said it. It's funny because there's this moment with Soren and her wyvern where it's like some feet, I'm guessing, in the tail or on this side. It winds around her neck and just takes a nap in the little crook of her neck right here. And I'm like, this is like a pet. Like, it's adorable. So yeah. But setting, you said broad strokes, that it felt that way for me as well.
Yeah, I don't think it really got into the setting because for the most part, this entire book, 90% of it occurs not even just in a city, within a couple of buildings in a city. So because of the nature of that story, and even when they go out to the woods, they're out in the woods. Like, that's as much environment as you get is they're out in the woods. Yeah. So I think that definitely lowers, or there's just not the opportunity to really get more detail.
Yeah, so. And I wouldn't say it super needed it. Sometimes books for me, I need the setting more, but this is fast. This is a short book. We sort of get it at one moment when the dragon falls to this planet or whatever planet it is, and is it in their preterite form. And they're like, they haven't been running on their feet yet, and they're like running through a forest and stepping on sticks and spiny things, and they don't know what it means, and it's scary for them. That was interesting. But yeah, outside of that one moment, I don't get a lot of depth in terms of the setting. But that's okay, because we're going to move into probably was one of our most favorite things to talk about on this show, which is the magic system. So we've talked about it a little bit. How did you feel?
I genuinely think this is probably one of the most unique magic systems I've really read in a book in a long time. Most magic systems tend to fall into, superpowers or, traditional, wave your hands, speak the right words, and you get a spell effect. This one, feels like a channeling type of magic, because basically each person that gets these seals, they embed into your chest. Like this little container gets embedded in your chest, and you can take out what's called the seal, which is basically a little roller, and you can use that for signatures. And actually, ancient cultures used to use this kind of thing for signatures. But that's what you're basically casting your magic through. So you do whatever your magic is, and it goes through that item and puts the effect into the world. And everyone seems to be aligned with one of these colored magics. They call them the dragon gods, but it's a color of magic. So Arcadia is very much on the blue magic. So that includes a lot of liquid or fluidity type stuff, including shape changing. Whereas like the green magic is very much the healing magic, and the forbidden purple magic is like mind effects, like charms and the like. But the idea of a culture basically manufacturing these seals, embedding it into a person, and what's kind of cool, if like when you sign your name to something like a contract, that makes it like magically enforceable. So like the person with the contract can like hunt you down, knowing GPS exactly where you are, and cause you physical pain to make sure that you pay your debts or whatever the contract entails. And I don't know, I found that really unique and novel.
Yeah, it was interesting. We touched on this a little bit, but I didn't picture it as like a rolling type deal. I pictured it more of like an amulet, because Some people can't afford to have the healing magic to have it embedded in their skin. You can wear it on a chain on your neck. And so like every kid, every baby born gets one. Every single baby, and it's made from dragonstone, and your name is embedded into it, and it has a unique seal, so that if you put ink on it and press it or roll it, how you interpreted it, I imagined it being like pressed like a seal, then that seal's tracked to you, and they sign contracts that way, as you said, all sorts of things, and your magic has a trace. So magic that flows through that, I'm going to call it like an amulet, flows through it, has a signature. So even if you're long gone and didn't stamp, the signature will still read, which I think was definitely super cool. What I thought was nervous for me in the beginning was they immediately, I want to say like page 5 or something, in the first Arcady chapter, they say elemental magic. And I think that's funny because I'm like, oh no, not again, not elemental magic, not again. But then it becomes clear that's how their people at this time understand it. But it's actually not elemental. It just manifests in somewhat of different elemental forms. It's really just draconic magic. So the source of all this power is draconic.
Yeah, and they make it clear, like the different colors of magic are tied to one of the dragon types. So there's the fire, that's the red magic, and then blue is the more water magic, and green, like I said, that was healing. Purple, I can't remember if there's any other colors that stand out. At least no one in the story uses the other colors, if there are others.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting because, and this is non-spoilery for anyone reading, the dragons are banished to another world, as we know, but they've left behind this dragon stone, and it was something precious to them. And it actually says in this book, it'll probably get answered in a future book, and they say, and the humans don't even know what dragon stone is. They say that, so the author clearly tells you, I'm not going to tell you what it is. So we don't know what it is when we're reading this, but we do know that the dragons definitely feel like they've been stolen from. And so whenever humans use this magic through this dragonstone, whatever dragonstone is, it could be the bones of an old dragon. We don't know. We have no idea. It could be a literal stone that they forged somehow with their magic. But anyhow, every time humans use magic, Everin says like, oh, using magic that they stole, especially if it's like used against him. He's like, that's not even yours. Like, he's offended.
I think it's entirely possible. Like we mentioned, part of the origin story of this world is that the humans stole a lot of the dragon magic and banished them. It's even possible they took that dragon magic and shoved it into the ground and created the dragon stone. And once again, they forgot what they did. They forgot that they had banished the dragons. I suspect, though, that I think this is a false story. I think something else happened, and the future books will reveal that. For example, and I mentioned this in the midway, is that the preterite form that the dragons use, the kind of humanoid form that they can take, that word actually means like past tense. I had initially thought that was like meant predator, like predator prey, like this is their predator type form. I was like, no, this is like a past tense of language. And so, did they used to be humans? And now I
interpreted it that way too. Like before, yeah.
Yeah. So they'd become dragons. They might have been people in the past, and they became dragons. And maybe the other humans were like, we're done with these guys. Like, they're getting too powerful.
No idea. The author just leaves it open, which is kind of cool. Yeah. But yeah, this magic was definitely different from anything I've read, other than some common like dragon tropes that we see, which is like the bond through human and dragon telepathically, dragons plus riders. You have to be bonded to be a dragon plus rider. We see this in Aragon. We see this in Fourth Wing. Even it's all these Priory of the Orange Tree. All these things. And there's a bonding ritual that takes place. So this is very common. And so none of that to me was new. If we think of magic in terms of fantastical creatures as well,
yeah,
I didn't feel anything new in terms of dragons. Even dragon taking human form. I mean, that's World of Warcraft. I mean, this has been around forever. So I felt like none of the dragon stuff was new for me. But the magic was cool.
Yeah, and the dragons in this, they are feathered dragons. They're not completely covered in feather, but they're more highlighted in feathers, like a lot of the modern interpretations of dinosaurs, where they just have like little crests of feathers and that kind of stuff, decorative feather. But I don't know. I thought yeah, I would agree that the common tropes of like the binding and the emotional connections and psychic telepathy, that's all pretty standard for this type of story.
Yeah, it's even common in terms of like how the dragon can do it first and the human can't do it for a while. It takes a while to be able to speak both ways. That's in so many books. But one thing we didn't mention in terms of the magic was that it can run out. And that was a huge piece of this book too. You get drained.
I have read some books where that does kind of happen. The way it happens in this book, I felt was pretty special, because as you use too much magic, you actually start becoming extremely hungry, and if you don't get some calories in you fast, you basically will go almost feral, like 28 days later, and you'll start
I was just going to say 28 days
start
later.
running and biting and the nearest thing
Yeah.
to you just to get some calories. And if you don't, that might become permanent.
Yeah.
And
That was interesting.
They call it starvelings.
Starlings, yeah.
And that was cool. I think it was a neat idea.
But before we're going to sit on these thoughts, we're going to stew on them, because it's time to show me the map.
All right. So this map, I'm just gonna say, I never looked at it, and the reason why is because I already said the reason why.
Yeah.
The whole book takes place essentially in 3 buildings, and then a tiny bit in the forest. It's really so. While it is a pretty cool map, it's an interesting map. It does not. It's not yet useful. I think maybe by
Agreed.
the time the next book comes, maybe then it will be more useful. But so far, it really just wasn't pertinent to the story. I'm super glad it exists. I think it's actually drawn pretty really interesting. I like the way the art was done on this. The elements like the mountains and stuff, they're very stylized. The forests, follow a traditional RPG forest kind of format, which I like. But
It does.
the cities are weird, because the city's just a giant name, and the bigger the name, the bigger the city, I guess. But it's hard to say. I don't know.
Probably won't spend too much time on this one, because it was basically useless. They weren't anywhere near any of this stuff. They do mention the spine at one point in the book, and I was even bothered by that, because in so many books, and this is common anyway, just even in like, a mountain range looks like the spine of a dragon, but this map is like echoing Aragon. In Aragon, there's the spine, and there's the fangs, and there's like the tail, and they basically say it looks like a dragon that's risen up from the earth, and they use like that as like some form of topography, like this is what a dragon, what the part it would be on a dragon. So I felt like they borrowed, so that was a little like, really,
Yeah,
like it's been so many years between these books, don't
yeah.
make something else.
And even in like Dungeons and Dragons in the Forgotten Realms, they have what's called the Spine of the World, which is basically a big mountain range.
Yeah.
But strangely enough, like, as much of a trope as that word is, the spine, it doesn't exist in the real world that I'm aware of. And yet it's in a lot of fantasy. So
I mean, I guess the Rockies I would think of that as the spine here, like the sharpest points of it. But I don't know. And maybe it's like so common enough that everyone's just adopted this as like a common thing to say on maps. But maybe I shouldn't get irritated by it. Maybe in all this kind of old worldy feel of lore and maps, like, oh, that's the spine. Maybe that's just the same as like old and ye and like, maybe. But I guess get tired of seeing it. The spine was mentioned in A Sword of Bronze and Ashes too at one point. And then Stormfell. I just think Stormwind. I don't know. I just felt like there wasn't a ton of imagination in the names on the map. But yeah, it was all right. It was alright. Map was just fine.
Yeah, I think if maybe you get more into the fantasy trope of, traveling across a world, then this would be a lot more useful. Just because of the scope of this book, the map wasn't terribly useful.
Yeah. So, for me on the map. But actually, we rate the map now. I forgot about that. What do you think?
Um, I I think because it's not a useful resource, it can't be too high. But I like the style of the map. I'm glad it's there, but because it's not, the main use of a map is to inform the reader. I think this book would have been better served to have had like a city map or just a region map for where the book actually took place. I think that would have actually been a far more useful. Like, here's the lock shop, and here's the manor, and here's the thieves' den, and that kind of stuff. So I think I'm gonna give this one just a 2. It's a good map. I just don't think it served its purpose.
Yeah, I actually think a 2 as well. This felt like it would have served well to have a sword catcher map, like how you were just describing, like knowing where each of these little dens were. I was trying to picture the city. In particular, I was trying to picture where the location of this sort of den was, like for this group of thieves that they go visit, and they're up on some, like, it looks like there's described as somewhat of a foxhole with like sort of like holes and caves, but then at one point they're on like a nice rooftop, I think, and I'm like, wait a minute, I'm confused. So I would have liked to see these things. So yeah, it's great that it has a map. Yay, more fantasy books with maps, but like not very useful too. All right, which brings us to crossbows.
Yeah, and now this one was very interesting because there's a lot of crossbow bolts in this story. I don't remember actually seeing a crossbow.
Yeah, they said cross bolts the whole time.
So
but
the bolt is the arrow.
Okay.
Like in crossbow terms, a bolt is the arrow. At least that's how you call it in D&D. But the actual crossbow never actually. I don't remember seeing anyone with a crossbow. I just remember cross bolts being shot at people and dragons and
a
stuff.
Lot.
But,
crossbolt was mentioned like 4 times on one page towards the end.
But strangely enough, I don't know if there was actually a crossbow.
I don't think so, but can we make them be sort of the same? I mean, they're not that different.
Absolutely.
Right?
It's
okay. Yeah, some significant, somewhat like crossbolt bow references in this one.
So
like a lot.
Yeah. So this is probably the most crossbow action we've seen in a book.
On 2 pages, though. Like, it was over like 2 pages.
I'm going to say this is above average, so I'm going to say this is a 4. It definitely... It like I said, it's probably the most we've encountered so far, and it's very pertinent to, like, 2 different scenes.
Yeah, absolutely. 4 as well, just for the sheer number of the word crossbow, crossbolt, and for the character in particular that one of these is aimed towards. I think we can say that. Yeah?
Okay.
We'll leave the viewer guessing. 4 for crossbows, 2 for the map. We're on to rating the book, Rob. It is time. Okay, so let's briefly go through each of these sections, rate each of these sections, and then quickly rate the book. We won't spend a ton of time on it, but starting with characters, how did you feel 1 to 5?
I think the characters were well developed, and I enjoyed reading these characters, so I'm going to say this is a 4 for me.
Wow. Oh, it's so nice to see you liking books I picked out, Rob. Oh. Wonder what that feels like. No, I'm kidding. So I give Everin like a 4 or 5. I thought Everin was very well developed on all the different stages of Everin. I can't say that for the rest of the book. Everyone else is like a 1 for Soren. I think Soren has a lot of growth. Soren's cool, mixed background, cool, interesting, like promise, but not a lot to their chapters, and I can't describe Soren very much. And 2 for the rest. So I'm gonna put characters at a 2 in this book. Everyone's not enough to save it. Mm-mm.
And see, I liked
all the secondary.
I feel like I liked Arcadia a lot more than you did. So.
Yeah, all the secondary characters too. Like, not, just besides the main 4, there's just not enough of it. All right, so the writing in this book, how does it stack up to some of the greats we've read?
So I think
I'm leading the witness.
So I really enjoyed this setting of this book quite a bit. For the most part, I don't think it was the most developed. I think the setting itself was kind of, propped up. It's like a play facade at a play. It's just there just enough so that the character have something to interact with. It's pretty shallow, the setting itself. So I'm gonna have to say this one's a 2 for me.
I really like how you described that. Like a play with like thin backdrops behind it. Like, you don't need the backdrops to be amazing for the story to stand out. Like, you still get it. It breathes through on its own. But yes, that's a perfect way to describe it, Rob. I also give it a 2. But it didn't hurt the story at all for me, no. Which leads into the next part of what we were going to talk about and rate, which we didn't talk about earlier, but we sort of always talk about, which is like the general story, like the overall, like just the story itself. How would you rate that?
So what we really haven't talked about so far is the fact that this is a heist story.
It is
at many levels. It's a heist within a heist within a heist, and then there's another heist off to the side. I think I love those kinds of stories. They're a lot of fun, especially the way the story twists. A lot of heist stories, they'll often have it be where the characters, they're thinking so many steps ahead and you're just trying to keep up. This is not that kind of a heist story. They have a plan, and the plan doesn't work. Because it's not an insane developed plan. It's just a plan. They're like, we're going to steal this thing, and then we're going to go, borrow this thing from over here, and then Everin the whole time is like, I'm going to steal Arcadie's magic. So I think the heist works really well, and I enjoyed that about the plot. Actually, what I didn't mention before is that's actually what Soren is. Soren, in a heist story, Soren's the beat cop that's 3 steps behind.
It's true.
And trying to figure out what the criminals are up to. That's what Soren's role in this story was, and I thought that was actually well done. I mean, it's a trope of the genre, and I'm glad it's there.
All right. So what do you rate that?
I'm going to say this is a 4 for me. I think this is a very solid heist story.
All right. Yeah, so there's a lot of development to this story, right? There's Arcadie, who's fighting the troubled family past, trying to work hard through this very class structured city to make a name for themselves, and that stain and trying to remove it, which ultimately kicks off this plot to begin with. And then there's the whole dragon concept, and then there's the heist, and the whole bonding. So then we haven't really talked much about it, but the romance in this too. So it's all there. So for that, just having all the elements that I like to look for, I also give it a 4.
Mm-hmm. And we didn't mention earlier, but I actually thought the romance, it's the slowest slow burn type of romance, but I mean, it does get spicy there.
Yeah, it gets a little spicy, but it gets spicy in terms of maybe 2 teenagers in a car where everything's on top of your clothes still. It's nothing's really past third base.
Well, we kind of already mentioned they can't touch.
Yeah. So is a slow burn gets.
Yeah,
so
and
we mentioned earlier.
And I think that that part was done well for what
yeah,
it is.
Was. Especially if anyone at all is nervous about a queermance, just broaden your horizons, read new things, branch out. It doesn't get it's seriously teenagey. This is a close stay on. Like, but it's definitely heated and it's a cool read. So we have to rate we both liked the story, but then there's how the story's written. So how did you feel about the prose of the book?
So I think the prose is, like I said, very accessible, easy to read and understand. It's not particularly distinct as outside of the point of view. I like the novelty of of using all three major point of views. But beyond that, I'm going to say this is fairly average, run of the mill for me. I'm going to say this is a 3 for me.
Yeah, I really found myself mostly just enjoying Everin's chapters. What's really nice about this book is it tells you the character who the chapter's about and whose voice it is before you read it, which I actually really liked that because I didn't have to like try to think about it. So like accessibility, as you said, it makes it very simplifies things. Like, oh, we're on Everin's chapter. I love Everin's chapters. Sometimes that would make me want to read more. Whereas when I would get to Soren's chapters, I'm like, oh, Soren chapter. How long is it? I would actually thumb the pages and think like, oh, I don't know if I want to read this.
And see, I think there were some clever elements for which point of view was being used during the story. For example, all of the romantic elements happened during Arcadie's chapters, not during.
Did they?
Yeah, not during Everin's. At least that's how it stood out to me. Because, and I think that was deliberate, kind of like in Fourth Wing, they're trying to intentionally make the audience unsure of how Everin's feeling.
Okay.
During those moments. And I think that was deliberate. I wonder if it's also,
what if his urges are more animal? Like, what if we don't want to read that? I don't know. But I don't think I noticed that they were in Arcadie's voice, but I appreciated those chapters because they were well written and enjoyable to read. Yeah, outside of that, I didn't get a ton of it. I didn't even love how the first chapter started. I mean, I mentioned I liked that Everin was finding his voice and learning how to speak, but the chapter was written so broken. So first reading this, you get like a poor style of writing that's very intentional. But not knowing that, you have to get past that. I didn't love that first chapter, how it was written. But I've actually delved into some good reads, and I'm in the minority here. So I should say that, because a lot of people seem to like how that was written. But overall, the Everin chapters weren't enough to save it for me either, and it was written in too simple of language. I think they could have added some more complexity to this. So I give the writing a 2.
Okay.
And then this basically brings us to my favorite thing to rate, which is the magic.
Okay.
How would you rate the magic?
I think the magic, I felt for the most part the magic was very distinct. I liked that. I liked the whole stone and the seals. I liked the way they used to bind dragons, but now the humans bind themselves to rocks. I think I found that to be very interesting. But the magic itself was fairly hand-wavy. There are some distinct rituals that you can do for specific effects. But most of the magic in this book is what you might call, common magic or cantrip type magic, where everyone that has a little bit of magic can kind of do those things. Like, if you're a blue wizard, you can shape change, and that's just what all of you can do, and the people with fire magic can light fires. So I definitely think that there's a lot of interesting here, but because of the short page count of this book, we essentially didn't quite get enough to really see the system as it was conceptualized. So I'm gonna also go with a 3 on this. I'm excited to see where this goes, but I don't have enough information yet.
So this was a tough one for me to rate because there's so many elements to it. draconic magic imbued in some sort of stone, however that happens. How do the sorcerers, magicians, I don't know, it's like an order that when you're born and they make that amulet, what magic is that? Is that other one that we didn't really know? I don't know, but they basically can make these seals. That's something. The depletion of the magic, the replenishing, the negative side effect of when you essentially become void in this like 28 days thing. All of that to me was high level magic building. That creeps up into the 4s, maybe even slightly higher. It's not a 5, but like the building behind making all that work, I thought was super cool. I've never read that before.
I think,
but
I agree with everything you're saying.
Yeah, I love all that, and I could just eat that up, and I could have a whole book about that. But everyone has it. Everyone can be affected by it. Everyone can become starvelings, but like that cheapened it a little bit. I don't know why, and it maybe cheap's the wrong word, but like it was everywhere. Everyone gets an amulet, whether you're poor or not. And how in a society that's so class driven, they give all the poor people ones too. Now people can spruce them up. You can put your like amulet of sorts inside like a setting. You buy settings, and that's what Arcady had embedded in their skin. But it broke down from there for me in terms of the magic use. So you have this really powerful magic, but how you wield it and your ability to wield it is different. And it broke down there. I don't know how to describe that. That's like a 2 for me. I guess it's a 3. I would say 3, but could be so much more.
Yeah. I think there's a lot of great stuff here for the magic.
Super good.
And yeah. I'd be interested in seeing more. Like I said, that I think the part that I think is probably the least realistic to me is the starveling. It seems so easy to cause that to happen, and you would think that maybe the government would be like, yeah, maybe we're not going to give this to everyone. It's a little too dangerous. Yeah. But
you could totally population control, like, y'all just don't get food this week. Oh my gosh.
But overall, I think it was very interesting and holds a lot of promise.
Yeah. Yeah. So before we give our final rating of the book, what we always do is we say, what might impact that. We're not just going to average your scores and give you a number. Like, would we refer this to a friend? Like, is this something we would read the second book of? We know this is going to be, a series. So what do you think in terms of that?
I absolutely am interested in the sequel book. I will happily pick that up. I think this was, and that's probably going to hint at my review, but I think there's so much here in this book that I'm hoping the next one will maybe be even more ambitious in its scope. As far as like what I recommend to a friend, yeah, absolutely. I think this is an easy recommend for a lot of people. It's easy to read. The concepts come out very easily. I thought this was a really solid book. Especially, was it as challenging as something like The Book That Wouldn't Burn? No, or the Sword of Bronze and Ashes. No, those were much more challenging as far as read. Like I said, this is a fun heist story. Fantasy heist stories are awesome.
I can't really see myself reading this again. It wasn't enough here for me. The heist section of it, yeah, the heist stories are awesome, but I could have taken or leave it. Like, didn't need to even be in the book. I thought, like, just take the whole section out. I thought it was kind of useless. But, yeah, I don't know. I would read it if Rob read it and said he liked it, and then I could borrow his copy, maybe. Although I have this horrible thing where I like to build out the rest of series, and I can't stand seeing my shelves empty with them, so we'll see where my brain goes on that. But I also had the situation where I was talking to a friend about the book at lunch, and I was talking about the story, and, some of the queer man side of it came out, and they were like, I don't know that I'd want to read that. And I don't, this isn't like not singling out this friend or anything, but like I think it still is uncomfortable for some people to read. And that's unfortunate. People have to like kind of expand and try new things. But it might be hard for some people, and I get that. But it wasn't difficult for me. I thought it was great. But I know there's people out there who won't touch it because of that, and I'd hope they'd try. That makes it harder to refer out, just because some people limit themselves as an audience, although I think the book does a great job to pull them in. So that part of it's too bad, but that does limit, who I know will read it. And then, I'm not that excited, especially since the next book seems to maybe want to pick up on Soren. And also there's this big kind of plot moment in the book where I think the author's trying to be like, oh, I surprised you with this big thing. And I was like, okay, I saw that like a mile away. So
I think you're talking about there's kind of two like stingers to this book. Mm-hmm. And I'm not going to say I saw them, but they're definitely like, being like, hey, you should definitely come back and find out what's going on here.
Nope, not enough.
But
if you're going to build that up and cliffhanger it, I have to want the next pages, and I don't.
And I didn't feel that it was a cliffhanger, though, because the plot of this book fully does resolve. It's not like it's left hanging. I think that the plot is bookended. It's just that at the very end, they're like, there's a post-credits, that hints at, oh, there's this purple guy in space, Thanos. That's how I felt. That's how I felt about that. That it was just like the post credits be like, hey, come back for more. But the story itself was complete.
All right. So how would you rate this book overall? Final answer.
I think I'm going to have to give this a 4. I think this is...
Wow.
I think it's both ambitious in scope and the actual... that the story elements is sufficiently, it's complex. It feels like it's intentionally complex, like the way the different aspects of the story interweave together. And I thought that was great. And like I said, the goal of the story was done well. I wasn't super emotionally attached to these characters. I didn't have my Rocky Spider-Man moment where I was like, oh no, so that's what keeps it from being a 5.
Okay.
But I really did enjoy this book, and I think it's better than average. I think it's definitely more than a 3.
So I give it a 2, Rob. And we flip-flopped this month. I cannot believe you ranked this a 1. I cannot believe you. And this was a very good book on bullets, like bullet points. This is a Cliff Notes genius, but did not execute between the bullet points. I felt myself saddened. Bullet point cool. Oh, bullet point cool. So yeah, I feel bad because the magic's great. Like I said, there's great elements. I give the story a 4. I give the magic it was almost a 4. So I feel bad, but it's a 2. What can you say?
I definitely think we chose each other's books this time. We rated them very consistently. And even I remember when you described your book for the first time, and I was like, man, that sounds really cool. When like right off the bat, they're like, okay, your mission is to make the human fall in love with you and then kill them. Like, yeah. That's a great premise.
I definitely think my books have killed off way more people than your books have.
They definitely have.
That was a twist of events. But you know what? At least we were both happy this month, even if we weren't both happy at the same times. Right? All right, so that's all we have today. Thank you for subscribing. We're into the hundreds now, getting close to 110. So we appreciate every single subscriber. Join in next week because we will announce our next 2 books. It's a great time to join in on the read with us and join our Discord and follow along. But that's it, Rob, until next time, right?
Yeah, and I'm looking forward to seeing what you bring because I brought something pretty wild for next month.
And I picked a classic. Tune in next week, everyone. See you then.